Good evening to this architese context event. First of all, let's welcome our guest this evening, which will discuss with us Momoyo Kaijima from Bow-Wow, Jan de Vylder from the Vylder vinck, taillieu, and Patrick. It's only François Charbonnet. Is Patrick coming too? No. Okay, so it's François Charbonnet from Made in. Let me first introduce the context and the idea why we gathered here to discuss. Most architects would agree that architecture is about giving form. This seems obvious, while others see the focus on defining spaces. Nevertheless, the focus within the architecture discourse has shifted towards parameters like economy, ecology, social performance, participatory processes, and others. We as editors of Archithese heard people say that a debate about form, or maybe to be more precise about geometry, coherent spatial systems, and aesthetics, or other aspects within architecture, get less and more redundant. We with the magazine agree to a certain degree. We also want to situate the debate about architecture within these overlaps with external conditions and the knowledge of other adjoining disciplines. But at the same time, we're not willing to let go the debate about form. In contrary to what I said before, we observe a re-emergence of strong geometries in recent design, bringing back the idea that design architecture is about the combination, composition, or subtraction of geometrical forms, like squares or circles, first of all. Looking at the Swiss situation, this seems to be especially common within architects trained at the Università della Svizzera Italiana in Mendrisio. That's why we decided to focus on the re-emergence of strong geometries within Archithese's December issue, which will be called The Circle. Our talk will address these questions. We will later, after the talk, we will maybe have a video. If the quality is good enough, we will put it online, and we will have like a written version of the conversation in the December issue. So thanks again to the three of you for accepting the invitation to discuss. I also want to thank the ZeitRäume Basel biennial team for this delightful cooperation, especially Johanna Köhler, who organized the event with us. I'm glad that the Rohrwerk, the artwork and instrument developed in collaboration between the architecture office of Made in and the biennial team on from Bergisi is the background or the foreground, as you want, of the talk. And you will later also see that it established a dialogue about the themes we're interested in tonight. So let me introduce our guests. Momoyo Kaijima studied architecture at the Faculty of Domestic Science at Japan's Women's University and at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. She was a guest student at ETH Zurich. She founded Atelier Bow-Wow with Yoshiharu Tsukamoto in 1992. She has been teaching at the Art and Design School at the University of Tsukuba since 2017. She's a professor at ETH Zurich. I skip all the books and exhibitions and lectures, so we have some time to discuss. François Charbonnet studied architecture at ETH Zurich. He was an intern at John Keenan and Terence Riley Architects in New York, then for 3 years a collaborator of Herzog and de Meuron. After that, together with Patrick Heitz, he established the architecture studio Made in Geneva. He has been teaching at EPF Lausanne, the Academia in Mendrisio, at the Kyoto Design Lab. Currently he's professor at ETH Zurich, where he has also been visiting professor before. And to my right, Jan de Vylder studied at the St. Lucas School of Arts in Ghent.
He was a collaborator and project manager at Frank der Mühl Architekten und Stefan Bale. I guess it's totally badly pronounced. Since 2000 he ran an own office together with Dries Architekten, and 2008 he established Jan de Vylder Architects together with Inge Vinck, and since 2010 their firm was Vylder, vinck, taillieu with Jo Taillieu. He was also teaching at several schools like La Combré in Brussels, at TU Delft, St. Lucas in Brussels and Ghent, Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, and the Università della Svizzera Italiana. He's also currently a professor at ETH. Very warm welcome to the three of you. Great we can have you tonight. Coming back to the observation I made in the introduction about the growing doubt if architecture is a question of form anymore. How do you position yourself as teachers and with the work of your offices towards these questions? I have specific inputs, but first I would like to give you that question in this very broad openness and ask you to answer. Momoyo, you like?
Oh, I don't really. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and introduction. The form you asked me to. The form is basically. So I'm really interested about the form. So because of the form makes us as an architecture method to emphasize the thinking, the kind of good driving force for the composed how location, how related, something like. Because the form is always very important method, like what is the meaning of the square, or what is the meaning of the circle, or what is the meaning of the triangle. So each form has some effect or behaves as a forms. So that now that I'm teaching in the school, so architecture behavioralism, so that's always trying to be let the people to understand what is the form behind. The why form affects some people to do, or why the form affects to the climate, or why they took the form, like a triangle roof is given the divide the water from the sky to two sides, for example, or like a round form is makes more like some special acoustics effect and so on. So that's why. So for me, the form is a kind of interesting tackle object or subject. Could be enlarged to the how we could engage the form and the other environment could be related together in the design method. So that's why. So of course the form is sometimes in Japan. So we say. Formalistic, or I don't know, some a little bit critical way of the say, so the formalisms. For example, the 1980s, the postmoderns, so many architects Japanese architects trying to engage kind of formalistic things and thinking. Arata Isozaki also the thinking about a lot of forms and form to our culture. So, but I really like to thinking about the form, but also we always try to find out the meaning of the forms.
Looking at the work of your studio, you seem to be more hesitant to use this what I might call a strong geometry. So you would not find the square or the circle. Often it seems you're more looking for forms which are based in like the everyday, in the ordinary. So you first strike out the importance and the psychological meaning of these forms. At the same time, you seem to be very hesitant to use especially these strong forms. Is that observation?
Strong form. What is the meaning of the strong form?
I mean, the strong form is like the clear geometries, like circle, square, triangle, pyramid, sphere. This kind of formal vocabulary.
But maybe we would like to try to open up the kind of strong form meanings. I think we are always using sometimes open up the meaning of the form. So like angle or like a very old work. Also sometimes we often think about why the triangle effect, which kind of angle would be very effective for some certain context. And also sometimes the angle are always related to the geometry, but also the geography, so in the location. And I think a lot of, we could say, so even if just 1 degree or 2 degree or something like so, we could find some different effect from the 90 degrees. So that we tested several things and checking or play with them to how it works and so on and so on. And also the relational geometry. I don't know how to say it good words or not, but geometry is originally, I think, meaning is also the figure out of the relationship as a form, and they calculate the more as a mathematical factor and the relational condition, so the form and everything. So I believe maybe so not sure, in architecture sense, maybe one hand it could be more abstraction, but also one hand it will be more very pragmatic or practical, so condition in the context.
Okay. Now I have to watch out that I don't give an answer that I want to answer on a question that will come. But the thing is, of course, I think there is nothing without a form. And at the end, and that I have to avoid to answer now, but at the end I do think, of course, being an architect, taking into account all the things we are confronted with today, economics, ecology, sustainability, life, everything, we should never forget that at the end we have this capacity as architects to bring all those aspects in a form. And I write down here, I think there is never anything without a form. But now we should not confuse the debate, because I know exactly where you're heading for. On one hand, you have materiality, which is related to a certain form. So things are what they are. Stone is what it is, wood is what it is, metal is what it is, and it relates itself to a certain form. And in that sense, you can do experiments with that material and so consequently with that form. Steel expresses itself in profiles, but you can experiment with steel in different forms, different sections. That's one thing. On the other hand, you can also experiment the form as such. And you can try to find the material for that form. I believe this is quite where the whole talk is about tonight, is that eventual independence of the form. That is maybe looking itself a little bit away from the materiality. And that gives us to, I think, a totally different debate about form. You could say form is a consequence of the nature, but you also could say form is the start of an eventual other kind of nature, and maybe it's then not anymore a nature of material, but it becomes a culture of form. An abstraction, that's what I wrote down. So on one hand you have the form which is a consequence of the nature and leads eventually to an experiment. On the other hand, you have the form which is almost without the material, but then of course it needs the material. And the nicest thing in thinking about that is, of course, the almost childish piling up of a cube and a triangular shaped falling material, kind of. And that's where we are. That's almost the minimum thing of architecture, except, let's say, the modernistic idea of the flat roof. So you can very pleased with the simple cubes. But then if you come to a history of thinking, you add on the triangular shaped folium. And then you ask at most a debate on the definition of architecture without material. Isn't that the topic of tonight?
I would like to add, you questioned the coherence of form and materiality, and also asked the coherence of form and program actually, and these two things can be related or they can be kind of detached from each other. There's one thing you kind of mentioned briefly. These geometries maybe have the attitude to be like enclosed systems, which maybe have like a stability, but maybe also like an exclusiveness. And again, when we looked at the work of your office, we have the feeling you understand architecture as an open system where things can be added, which kind of invites the user or maybe another architect to just keep adding, and we therefore maybe these geometries we're aiming for are also more kind of absent in your work, and we wonder if that is this because of the coherence or maybe also the exclusiveness that a too strong form might have within architectural design.
I partly disagree on it. I mean, the expression of a strong form is not only its strong expression. I think those forms are always there somehow, but it does not limit you to stay to this abstract thinking of the form. If I take some projects in account, I would say literally you can draw perfectly the form on it. But of course that's huge ongoing debate, I think, in architecture between the nature of things and between the culture status of things. And we live, I think, in an era in which, of course, this very nature of things is very important at this moment. We are all confused on all the everyday talks and news we have about how this world is changing negatively and positively, and which challenges we have to cope with. And in that sense, the pure cultural idea on the expression of the pure form seems, and I underline seems, to arrive more to the backside of the debate. But that's of course something which I say no. I think at the end this kind of abstract thinking is always part of the work, but at this very moment, at this time frame, at the end, the particular link with the topics of life is very, very vivid at this moment. So not expressing the form only as an abstraction of form is, I think, something which is a little bit opposite towards the time frame we are in right now. We don't have the luxury in architecture to go back to an only cultural reflection on what architecture can be or should be. I think this is a lesson we learned, luckily, very intensively before the change of century. And that's why I think we are, as architects, hopefully, that powerful in today designing things. But we do understand also the actuality of the architectural topics today. So I don't think it's a loss of the idea of form. It's even very prominent, I think. If I look to the work of Momoyo and Yoshi, if I look to your work, it's not without form. It's maybe the first premise in what you do, but this form has a very wide and broad relation. And it's not anymore celebrated just like the form. But it's a very, I would say the form became not the expression, but the fundament. It's not the end, but the start of that.
That's some topics which are good for François.
Well, perhaps I'd like to broaden the discussion, since we were here for a musical event, and repeat also what Jan was saying, is that I don't understand the question, because it seems to me completely rhetorical. everything is form. Music is form. Literature is form. I don't know how to escape the form. There's no way you can escape the form. And I don't understand either why you call those strong forms an abstraction. Is it because an abstraction, or why is it abstract, those strong forms? Why do you call them strong forms? They have a reality that can actually be described not only by Euclidean geometry, but by functions, mathematical functions. For example, a circle, equal distance from a center, and so on and so on. So I think we're kind of, I'm sorry to use that expression, but we're circling around because we cannot escape the form. We're trapped into it. And we have to give it a meaning if we choose to actually believe that form can have a meaning, but not necessarily. It can be also devoid of any meaning. Jan was talking about a stone. A stone doesn't have a form with a meaning. It's only the one we project on the form. And therefore, any form, any meaning we associate with a form is a projection from the human being. It is not a meaning in itself. And therefore, I would like to say that I wonder how relevant this question is regarding the form nowadays, and we'll even go further. Any ism is an abuse and a deformation of what the discussion should be about, and there's no criticism. I don't see formalism. Of course, it's being used as a kind of a way to express a criticality towards a certain form, but this ism has no reason to be, I have the feeling. Yeah, we passed.
Maybe I think it's very good, interesting. So because of the Japanese formalism, so it's happened also against the kind of a break down to the context-Event rhythms, kind of. And I think form, he tried to make a kind of ideological or more some individuality, or of the architectural statement, so that they utilize as a form, so against the context. So that, but I think this kind of access nowadays is very, very also on one hand is very difficult. I think so that because of the context, somehow so in this city, modern city are very blurred and more so contaminated with different languages. So that's why so that we cannot equally make a strong access by just only the form. So that's why so maybe so the Arata was also it's expressed around the 1988 and 90s after the postmoderns, but I think nowadays we need to more think about the different stages of the form meaning because of now the many new reputation of the CAD or new multiple maximize as a form of reputation in the industry maybe. So that's why so we need to more conscious about what is the reputation of the form or what is the meaning of the form and so on. So to create a kind of access or not access and so on.
I have an observation we as editors made about the work of Made In, and by telling it you might also get a little bit clearer what we're aiming for. In most of the projects from Made In, we read a search for monumental expression within architecture. And we think you do this by working with images from architectural history, from infrastructure, mechanics, vehicles, and especially in the later three, these forms have derived from a search from efficiency. But you use these images and kind of give them different programs. So they become images, and these forms had a meaning in the sense of they had a clear function, but you kind of twist these things around. So there's something going on when you kind of explain this. I think that you will answer the question we're actually asking tonight.
Regarding the images and the fact that we reuse images, it is not always the case. I would like to make a difference between an illustration and an image. An illustration has no mystery, it doesn't have to be read, it can have a caption, but basically it's not bringing you any further. An image, and we're here at the Kunstmuseum, we know very well that no one would dare to say that Picasso is producing illustrations. He's producing images, something that can be read several ways. And that's what I very much like about the treatment that we try to do also with these images. And what interests me is how much you can vehiculate a multiplicity of understanding. And you talk about the monumentality, but the monumentality is never linked to, for example, the definite article, the. It's never the. It's always a monument, or it's always a something. And the indefinite article interests me very much because it's always goes with the idea of multiplicity. So there's never an absolute form, there's never. And then you mentioned another thing regarding the form, it is linked to a certain idea of performance. That is true, but we perform with architecture on several levels. I would like to forget, or let's say, leave behind a little bit this idea of modernism that form is linked to function. Form and function actually form a couple, or constitute a couple, which is undissociable. And that we have moved away a little bit from that, is that performative aspects of architecture have changed a little bit. And that is actually the whole question we're actually dealing with also with contemporary architecture. How to be performative in a certain context, like Momoyo works in, or like Jan does, and how we do it. And I think in that sense, you could link form with, it's always form and something. Every period in history has always associated form with something, with the vegetal, with the performance, with the industry, with whatever you want to associate it with. But I think it's a recurrent question. So we could almost drop the word form and just only speak about the as. Do you understand? What is it associated with? And therefore, again, it's a never-ending story in a way. We won't be able to sort it out. Because what you're pointing out too with those strong forms is what you call strong, because they are able to be projected. If you look at a triangle, of course you can project the whole triangle. If you look at something that you can't encompass through a function, then you have to go around the building in order to apprehend the form. So there is kind of an expediency in the form itself also. But there is no escape from the form, and therefore I would rather speak about form as, or what actually comes after the as, than the form itself today.
A question which I'm interested in the technologies you at Bow-Wow are using. You have the approach to talk to users of a house and try to consider what might be the possible usages, and maybe you also want to come up with your own ideas what the users can do in a house, what they did not have thought of before. So the forms you're actually choosing should trigger some kind of interactions, or maybe also trigger the opposite, should trigger like that people kind of rest or maybe have retreat from each other. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you translate like these kind of small studies about the behavior and your idea of what the behavior could or should be inside these houses into a form.
Maybe I think our studies are always something the form has not only one goal. So they always try to combine a tree or three or relational condition. For example, if we started to make a height difference of the floor, then it brings also different the movement for the people. And also it gives sometimes furniture, but also it gives some different view, or sometimes if it starts to relate to the window, or it's related to the material, as Jan says, so the different wood floor or tatami floor or something like that. Then we start to combine the several details in the forms. So that's why in the case of coordination for the react or for the attract the other behavior. And then we always design one thing, and if we step, I don't know, 1 centimeter up, and then we start to think, this 1 centimeter, how relate to the different things, and these different things are related to get a light, and then this related to something, get another detail, and so on. So that this kind of relational circulation of the forms makes more richness of the literacy of the form or attractive spatial condition in the forms. So I think a form meaning is for us is not freezing the completed material. It's more like a relational coordination, relational condition. So that means the form will be more lively. And in this case, of course, we need to fix for the carpentry, unfortunately. So we need to, 30 centimeter is a fix, or 41 centimeter fix. But if we have some hypotheses as a relational conditions, so we could test, we could propose to other matrix or other possibility to coordinate further design process. So that's why, me personally, so I think I tested several things, and we found, of course, steps, 7 steps is good, something like so. That we have some order in our office, so because if 10 steps is we cannot see over another level, so, but the 7 steps always we can see flooring, so from the standing position, something like, or sometimes if 6.5 or something like. We had some experience, but it's more. It depends. We could be more flexible, so because of we understood the reasons.
François, you said that all the forms have connotations, either if they are like common connotations we all would agree on, or maybe personal readings about it. I would like to put the work of Made In and the Vylder taillieu in this point into a dialogue, because I think there are fundamental differences. When I look at your work, there is of course a dealing with the place in that sense that you look at the typologies and materials which are typical for the region, and you some kind of reintroduce them, even if it's not in the foreground, but I think it's part of your work. So you keep working with forms, and maybe also repeating or kind of addressing the connotations that people have at that place. Well, when I look at the work of Made In, then it's about displacing, juxtapointing these images, mixing different things which might not be seen as something which has to do with each other on the first look. So I think there are exactly on that point, there are major differences in the approaches of your two offices.
Well, that's good news, no? You should be happy with the variety. Did you point out?
Throughout the debate, I could say not at all.
Not at all. No, there are differences. As I said, it's good news. But yes, we are interested in Made in what Guy Debord called le détournement. Is that when two forms are brought together, there is necessarily a new meaning that emerges.
Or it's totally random.
Or is it totally random?
It is totally random.
No, of course not. Of course not. The association has to be right, but it doesn't mean that because elementary, or if you look at them as an elemental feature, that they are completely different doesn't mean that they cannot produce a new meaning, and therefore I don't see the contradiction. There's a friction, of course there's a friction, you have to sort it out, and it's demanding, you have to be able to read it. But this becomes really secondary once the building is there, because it's going to be used, abused, transformed, and therefore this is almost like a kind of a personal questions, I would say. And I don't know if this is really at the center of what would be relevant to architecture today, I would say. But to point out the differences, yes, you can see differences and identities in the three offices, that's obvious, but I think there is also a strong commitment to what a form should be in terms of what adequacy we are aiming at. Durand said that he played this role, he played this game of developing a whole series of catalogs of forms, and then he comes to the conclusion that there are forms which are more adequate than others for living. And I think that's how you sort out the things in a certain way. Some forms seems to be more adequate, and that's your experience and your expectations that actually make you able to take a decision on that. Perhaps, yeah, you have a different aspect. You seem to be related to materiality much more than than I am, for example.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes when I read texts on architecture, and I think like, yeah, okay, but you can apply this text eventually also in a total other context. There is to me something like, and it's related maybe to the other topics that comes around, that is that as an architect at a certain moment, though you are so well informed on theory, on history, on materialization, on ecology and whatever, then comes that moment that you take decisions. And those decisions might be very subjective, though it all sounds very objective. And that's, I think, is just sometimes where it only is about, instead of trying to find out opposite positions. So this kind of capacity to deal, in fact, with the same knowledge and the same circumstance in a totally different way, I find quite intriguing, and I'm sometimes astonished on how people like to make totally different ideas, like, well, this is opposite, this is another vision, this is another time frame. I'm doubtful on that, honestly. I'm doubtful on that, because you say your things, and I say that, hey, I should say that. That they will be delivered to time and change and everything. And then you could say, well, maybe, or you try to keep it as long, and I try to keep it as fast as free. But what's the friction in time of 3 decades? What's the friction in time of 3 decades? So I'm there a little bit puzzled by this idea of trying to oppose it. I think at the end, we share all the same knowledge and the same context of time and place, but we act a little different. Not just to now make it all same, but to also a little bit, because that's where is the debate about, and I think François said exactly, yeah, but form, is it really the debate word? So no, maybe it's not the debate word, form, because the form debate only happens by those who look at it, whether the one is more form than the other. But as an architect, as such, at least, or that's maybe then a misunderstanding, we are not looking on purpose on it. We are far beyond that era in which the purpose of form was a cultural event. No?
But is it to say that we live in a time where anything goes?
No. We live just in a time where almost nothing goes anymore, and the importance of you, finally, to deal with everything that does not go anymore makes it a chance to talk eventually, and I don't like that word, to talk eventually about architecture. No?
I might say just because maybe context that surrounding our Belgium, Japan, Swiss. Well, now we are teaching together as a same school, but I think the background of the form is very important, I think. But because recently I have a very good chance to work with Jan, so to study each culture, Charbonnet, because I visit his office and also the office spaces, and also learning why their designs comes from. And I spend also the Switzerland, and I'm thinking, so your attitude is also very special in Switzerland, I think.
Yeah, we are happy with that.
but I think this kind of also to make a very strong like a statement for the society, I would say, both of the case. The form is somehow so your form is very strong and also very I would say I a little bit hesitate to say it, but somehow so heroic. Yes, or very cool, strong, like a primitive, strong forms in the city context. Try to say, long wall or like sometimes strong circle, something like that. And also Jan's case is I was visiting Ghent, and also his city has a lot of changing time by time, and also big contradiction or big difference our culture. So we are timber culture, but he's brick culture, I think, and also no. So that this kind of small brick element to working with stucco to establish the whole spaces or stone culture is very, very different also. And also that the culture is bringing some steel, so that is very steel, also very strong new element in base to the potteries of the bricks. And also glass and everything is very fascinating each other. So that's why I think when I visit a city, that these very different materials compose as interesting spaces, and also according to the different stage of the industrialization and the technical things, it also maximizes the different composing idea and spatial organization. So that's why and also the new culture or new institution or new organizing ask to the architects what is today, so on and so. So that's why I think I really interested to both of the case is why they use this form, so facing to the certain context. That's very, I'm very curious.
I agree, but I have the feeling especially François tries to slip out of that question which you just repeated. Let's do something else and talk about projects the three of you have done, which we kind of choose because the December issue, as I said, in fact, is about the circle, and these are both, these three are designs which have used the circle as a starting point or like a reference point in the design. I want to start with the Vylder Taillieu's house BM from 2011 and ask there to first describe it because we cannot show an image, and second tell us about the genesis of the reasons why this one family house is actually the form of an edgy circle.
Okay, I'm glad you say edgy circle because at the end it's not a circle. It's a movement of rooms that are ordered in a certain way, and finally it became a kind like circle. And why it is not a circle? Is it because it is really thought out of the systematic of the experience of the room towards an inner courtyard and towards an outer courtyard, and finally only dictated by the presence of trees which did not allow us to make a long line or to make a square building or whatever, and then at the end it was something like 17 rooms that segmented the one next to the other, and luckily it arrived to be a circle, kind of like. And I mean, I dropped another project in that sense, which is even more more in contrast to the thinking about the circle. I have to describe it, sorry, there is no image, maybe that's better even. But it was a building we made for a fire station, and it was on a certain plot in Flanders, and coincidentally the plot had on both sides a road, and it needed to orientate it to both roads, let's say almost equally, which was a strange circumstance. You didn't have really a front. Giving that a chance, we drew a circle on the plot. And we drew it at the moment that I have to admit, we were totally not inspired in inventing anything. So we just drew something like, it should be a circle, otherwise you cannot cope with the equal hierarchy it should have. And we drew it, and it was on a plan, and we saw like, wow, in fact it's unbelievable. This circle, which is a form, just solve a contextual topic. And then of course, we can draw pretty good, well, geometrical circles, but then if you draw an AutoCAD line on it, yeah, you see how badly you can draw. But luckily, that kind of misfit of the human hand really also seems to have unconsciously guided to the small differences in the terrain and so on and so on. But we made out of that a drawing series, of which we really were, next to that project, fascinated by the idea of the perception of the idea circle. Which is, if you say circle, it is geometry. But then there we found that the circle handmade and the circle digitally made were, of course, not perfect. But in its imperfections, it seems that the circle found a way to land on Earth and not only be anymore a circle that is in your mind. And I remember at the presentation, we said this is a circle, and I said, oh wow, what a nice, really perfect circle. It's not perfect at all. So, I mean, what is this idea about the circle for an architect? I think at the end, we are not artists who talk in relation to the idea of a circle in a very mental way. We use that idea of circle to create environments. And it could be it's a perfect circle. In a certain era, in a certain way of thinking, it could be a perfect circle. But the circle to me is more an idea than it's a geometry, honestly. And I think that's there where the friction of architecture starts. How you, intellectual, cultural instruments, how you implement them in a perspective of reality, life, environment, context, and so on. And then, vice versa, how you maybe at the end still are able to play that small theater of cultural form. That's something which is in some. You see, we talk the same language, eh? François?
You have the same language or not the same language? No, perhaps you made me think of something which I was really interested in a few years ago regarding these forms, and fell into a text by Catherine Deleuze, which most of you must know, perhaps. It's in Mille Plateaux. And he refers to Husserl's, which I haven't read, but he refers to Husserl's proto-geometry. And he defines imperial essences or royal essences, and of course the circle is one, because it can be defined by a function. But I'm really not interested into that. I'm really interested into the inexact forms, what he called inexact. That is, they are rigorously inexact, and not accidentally. And that's what makes the form actually extremely interesting. And I'd rather think of the circle not as an imperial essence, but as an inexact figure in architecture. You can never really come close to the absolute value of the imperial figure. You can always get really apprehended or get closer to it, but you can never reach it. And it's interesting that you pointed, for example, to AutoCAD, because AutoCAD or any CAD or computer-assisted drawing does not draw a circle. It splits it into a series of fragments, right? And the illusion that you have a circle is actually, and you have to reconstruct it all the time so that you get the circle. Therefore, I find also digitalization cannot build up a circle. Even digital music, when it's numerically recorded, approaches the harmonic curves by means of plus zeros and ones. But what you get is you can of course you can't hear it because it's so precise, but this is not a real harmonic curve. Only an instrument can do that, and your ear can apprehend it, but the computer has to decipher it, encode it, and approach it.
You will get the mic right back, because I also want to link your statement to a project you've done. You've made a competition entry for the Marina Tiefenbrunnen, and the proposal was actually two tubes. One with a triangle section, and the other one with a pipe or half pipe section. So that would be interesting to maybe understand the genesis of that project, connecting to your thoughts about form.
You're right there's a strong play with geometry in a certain way, but in that sense, I think here we were very opportunistically linked to a place and a program. And there was this, what do you call that, Gestaltungsplan, which actually foresaw a pier which would stretch, I don't know, I think 150 meters away from the shore. And it was never clear whether we could actually use this pier as part of the project, but we thought it would be a great opportunity, instead of splitting the program, to actually stretch it alongside things and to question one real thing, more than the architecture itself, is a relationship of architecture with its environment, with the landscape. And by actually moving onto the lake, because it was set like this also, it's not that we proposed to go onto the lake, we raised the question. I think any relevant project has to raise a question. I think any relevant project is not an answer to a problem. There's no problem feature in architecture unless you create it. And a problem is not an obstacle. A problem is a feature that helps you actually compose. So you have to create your own problems and performances. And a legislation, an expectation, a budget do not constitute a problem yet. The architect has to build it up. And therefore, in this case, the problem is the relationship of architecture and landscape. I'm not saying we were right. And of course, there is an analogical figure also there. It's like a wave. And it's giving the opportunity to more than just the members of the club to participate to a reality which would be, of course, grandiose and analogical, but also would question the relationship of architecture with the landscape, and not simply answer a program.
So, also one building at Bow-Wow, I'm interested in to close that trying to attach this question to objects or designs. There, I found a house for Ocho Al Cubo in Chile, a kind of a series of villas. Chilean and Japanese architects were invited to deliver a design, and the house you proposed there, it's not a circle, but it's a spiral. It kind of is almost a circle. Can you talk about this project?
It's a trap. It's a trap.
Yes, I tried to, where is my circle in our works? Looking for the things that you pointed out. So I almost the circles. But I think maybe Bow-Wow case is we understood the effect or force of the geometry. So. And that's why the circle is very, very strong, so spatial, so affections. So, and then maybe we little bit try to always this strong force of by geometry. Understood that way. So we little bit always to make a drilling meaning, put all spatial condition. Not only one, so maybe always we try to do two things. And then that's why, so if we start to do the circle, so but already only half, or like sometimes a wave, as you mentioned, or like a kind of spiral, so the changing the diameter, so to the one and another, or center is already so shifting to not only one center, so something like. So because of the people feel already force of the geometry, but also people can understand what's the effect in size. And then if we notice, this is the affection force of the geometry, we could escape easily. That's why, so maybe most of the Bow-Wow, if we utilize the geometry effect, then we always try to be dwelling. So sometimes plan is so, but section is different, or center is different. Always we avoid the same meaning, to emphasize of the one point. Maybe that is always we try to do some escape or avoid or kill each other. So, but that's kind of because of the we call it hybrid or hybridization. So, to the space would be should be maybe so double meaning always, and it's make more like urbanity or like a comfortability to enjoy the space and some freedom of the space that we could feel. So that's why we don't want to keep it the space as like a dogmatic way, so it's a more triple lots of meanings.
So we were asked not to be much longer than the hour, so I want to have the last questions or statement by François as we are sitting in front of the Rohwerk. This is also an object which has not only one but many circles, at least in the floor plan. And I would like you to give us a brief introduction to that project. And again, of course, there's something to say. You kind of wanted to move away from the modernist idea between the coherence of form and function, but there's something I think you have to tell us about this subject, where it maybe leads us back at least partially to that connection.
Yes, thank you. We were approached, I think 15 months ago, 16 months, a year and a half ago, by Bert Giesing, who was put in contact with us through a colleague of ours, Samuel Schulz, and he asked us to consider to develop a pavilion for the next festival, which would be dedicated to what he called hall, so the pipe or the tube. And the first thing we had to do is agree upon what a hall is, because the first time he came to the office, he had a model, a kind of wonderful model, very naive but very beautiful. And he said, this is how I could picture the thing, but of course you do whatever you want with it, don't. And I said, before we start talking about form, I would like you to, or let's talk really about form. What is a whole? How do you define it in architecture, for example, or in geometry? And therefore, a circle in itself is not a whole yet. I would claim, I'm not sure that it would be the perfect definition, but one of the dimensions on X and Y and Z should exceed, to a large extent, the other two. That's how I would define in architecture a pipe or a hall. And from then on, he agreed upon to actually investigate on the notion, and we came to this idea, and it was not analogical, because it looks like an organ pipe, but it was not analogical. But we had this idea that perhaps, for example, the folding of a curtain could also become a pipe in a certain way. And we had this idea to actually have a huge curtain being actually folded, and so many different folds and pleats that you could actually experience music into successively as a group of people, and at the same time intimately being actually into one of the pipe. It didn't work out for several reasons, for technical reasons and so on, and came out to become this cluster of holes, which allowed a centrality also for the scene. We wanted the centrality of the scene and not have a stage and a relationship, a hierarchical relationship between the instrumentalist and the public. So there's kind of a flattening, there's nothing new to that. The history of music of the second half of the 20th century has always investigated that notion of centrality in music, and I think most of the contemporary music can be also experienced from within a centrality. And that's how it came about, and then it needed also to become a sign in a certain way, because we thought, right or wrong, that contemporary music needed a kind of a visibility, and instead of remaining secretive and for a small expertise of people, we would like to bring it into semi-public spaces, or spaces which would be resonating spaces, urban, private or half-private, and would allow for music to be developed into an urban context and to really question the resonance of the city in a certain way. That's how it came about.
The three of you deserve a big applause for...
Invited to listen to this instrument, but you have to leave the courtyard once and then to re-enter, and for the concert you need to buy a ticket, and I do not even know how many tickets are left, but I hope enough for all that are interested. While leaving the courtyard, don't forget to make a short stop at our archithese table there, especially the new issue about Chile. I warmly recommend, and I hope to see as many of you as possible again in April, when we will do again the Swiss Life performance then in Zurich, and the exact date will be announced on our homepage. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening.